Welcome back to At Its Roots, exploring America's commitment to childcare. I'm your host, Tessie Reagan, and this is part two of our episode, Shallow Roots, Shallow Soil. Sorry. If you haven't heard part one yet, go check it out. But if you're ready to keep going, let's listen to this kind of conversation. Let's dig in. We now have our guest, Rebecca, with us. She is from the state of California with me. Yay! And I'm going to let Rebecca introduce herself.
Hi, I am Rebecca, and yes, I am in California with Tessie. I am a family childcare home owner. I've been licensed for over 10 years, but before that, I was actually a teacher in the school district. So my degree is in social science and family and consumer sciences. I'm super excited to be here with you today, Tessie.
So, if you guys weren't able to see the last episode, Split Roots, we were talking about what gender, labor, and racial identity in early childhood, and how that impacted the beginnings of the field. And if we don't have these conversations, we're not going to be able to, uh, make actual lasting changes. So now, before we dig into Shallow Soil, which is going to be about World War II licensing, white and Black feminism, and systems of access, we're going to ask um we want to know more about our panelist, and that is, what made you enter this field and what kept you in it?
Tessie, I'm going to be honest. When I was teaching and I was laid off at the recession at the beginning of the 2000s, I'd been doing childcare in various different childcare avenues, from private to public to formal and informal settings. And so when I was laid off and pink slipped from the school that I was teaching at, that's really when we started our family. And from there, our first child diagnosed with cerebral palsy meant that I was not able really to hold a job outside of, in many ways, taking care of him. And so starting our own licensed in-home family childcare was a way to continue the skills and experiences that I've grown up with, and the advantages, all of the skills that I can bring, in addition to still paying the bills, still taking care of him, and being able to then also provide for other children. And so, in many ways, quite honestly, it was an adapt and survive. As far as what's kept us in it, because we've now had 3 children and none of them need childcare because they are all old enough. It's really for those young children and for those parents that we know, especially with the childcare situation that we're currently in, if we're not, then who? And who will that who be, where these kids need the environment that as family childcare we provide, and the program that I run, that they can be outside in the dirt, that we garden, there are chickens, there's water, there's swing sets, all of these things that they're not going to get other places. And so with that current situation, it's really inspired me to be a bigger advocate for family childcare. And as you know, we're involved in various other advocacies and trying to shape policy. And so for me, for my own personal gain, it helps me give back to those providers that are just starting out. They're like, how do I make a handbook? How do I create these policies? What do I do when a kid XYZ? So for me, what's kept me in it is just thinking about how I can continue to help the field that's coming up, but also that I know I'm providing that quality care and giving this very vital service to these parents. I'm in a military town, and so a lot of my clients are either military or in the medical field. And so I know that they're getting the care that they need. They're getting those bacteria and microorganisms that they can't get anywhere else from being outside in nature with my program. And so that's really what has kept me in it, even though none of my children need that care anymore. And I don't have to take them to weekly appointments that I wouldn't
Yeah,
have had to, or that I needed to in the past.
that's very true. I know for me, what kept me in it was, I mean, my boys are 19 and 17. I don't like to think about it. They used to be short and fat and give me hugs, and now they're tall and skinny, and I have to look up at them, and it makes me sad. But I I think I was going to school to become a kindergarten teacher, and you know when you keep hearing people say that um all act like that all education has to take place in a certain setting in order for it to be valued or for it to be quality, it really just keeps me going, because I've had so many children leave my program with a passion for reading and a passion for digging in the dirt and looking at bugs. I even had a child tell me that they were going to be an archaeologist when they grew up. And I was like, wow. And you got all of this from digging in the dirt at school and stuff. But that really kept me in this field, because how, you know, I'm able to switch up and give them all of the things that they're asking for at the drop of a hat in this program, because I can actually mold my program to the children that are in it.
Absolutely.
And
You meet their
I
needs where they
feel,
are.
and I feel like having programs like that available for children is so important. What you can't have just one type of program available. Not all families need the same program. And going through the career, I think that was super important, which leads us to our next question, because when we're talking about all of this goes into our backgrounds and our education, and it says, what do you feel like people misunderstand about family childcare?
Well, first of all, they misunderstand that the reason we're doing this is to, that terrible B word, babysit.
Oh
And
yes.
family childcare is not babysitting, but they also don't understand just child development and the fact that a child, like you're talking about sitting, digging in the dirt, is still learning. Children are natural born scientists. How hard do I have to dig here? How far am I going to fling this? If I fling it too far, and it lands on my friends who are playing a game totally unrelated to what I'm doing, what's the cause and effect of how that happens? So
Well, the
that's
teacher run away
really
from me if I chased them with a worm, you know.
how fast you have to run to chase them with that worm, and who's being chased. How fast do they have to run to get away from the worm? There is so much involved in that. And so, where that misconception really comes down, in my opinion, is an ignorance on the part of the person who is putting that misconception forward, because they are clearly not aware of how those young kids, their developing mind works, how their brain works, whether it's brain hierarchy, that you have to build the bottom of that pyramid in order for those upper brain academic skills at the top, in order for them to be stable. As the saying goes, of building your house on a firm foundation. If they don't have that foundation, then those upper brain skills are not going to have the same staying power that they really need. And
And
so,
I think that actually is super important, because that actually goes into what I think is a misconception, is that we don't have that family childcare educators don't have the background of the education. I mean, you clearly understand brain development and how that goes into education. And I think I know we have spoken together to many family childcare educators who highlight why they're doing it, and they can explain to you that this is helping this motor skill and that motor skill and everything. But then we'll go talk to legislators, and we'll go talk to different people outside of this part of our field, and the assumption is that we don't know what we're talking about, that we don't have the education, that we are not as high quality. And I do think that comes from the fact that we are doing this from our homes is the assumption.
Yeah, and we go to, as you know, conferences. We do professional development. We're involved in local associations. And we understand that kids need X, Y, and Z because we are continuing all of this education. Here in California, there's no carrot for that continuing education. You don't get
Nope.
paid more for subsidy. And so we do it simply because we do want to invest in our children, invest in the knowledge in order to continue to provide quality care. And for me, again, that really just goes back to the fact that the people who are saying that it's not quality do not understand what quality is, first of all, and they don't understand what children need. Because if they did, they wouldn't be saying that. They would understand that they need to be out and to be in nature, to be in smaller environments, to see the cause and effect of their natural scientific tendencies.
And I don't think they would try and force cookie cutter systems in place um, all over the place. Well, that may not be beneficial for children.
Right.
You cannot have the same programs that you have somewhere else, like in a bigger city. Because I mean, I think both of us live in rural areas. I know I live in my area is a little more rural. We're like 80 miles from a city, but we have people that have backyard chickens, and there are cows and goats, and we've got to worry about coyotes and stuff like that. And so we live in, when you live in a rural area, the programs that may work in a bigger city may not go over as well in a rural area. So why not make sure that the actual access that is available for the people actually fits the people that are in that area? Usually, um, a lot of people in rural areas, they feel more comfortable in smaller environments for their children at first, because they are usually more close knit. They have families that live in these areas for generations, and they want to keep their children in these types of programs that they went to when they were younger and
Not
stuff.
only that, but natural ones. So I grew up in a very rural area of California, in Northern California. And right now we live in a much more urban area, halfway in between Sacramento and San Fran. So there's a lot of commuters, and it is quite practically city on one side, farmland on the other. We are absolutely in the very middle of all of that, sort of almost a dichotomy, if you will. And so you definitely can tell those that are maybe more familiar with that urban environment versus the ones that want more of a rural setting for their children. And that's why I firmly believe, as you know, I am a huge advocate for family childcare, absolutely above and beyond best practice. However, I will also not in any way deny that we need to um, honor a parent's authentic choice for where they
Yes.
put their child, whether that be in a formal preschool or whether that be in a more rural environment or a family childcare. And I so think that that's really where this comes down to, is that those persons who downplay family childcare and in-home settings are really putting that emphasis on formal childcare, and they're not on honoring that parent's authentic choice
That's a
for where they'd
choice.
like
Yeah.
them to go.
It's also, they're not honoring the child in that family, because that family knows their child may need this type of environment, and they're not listening that some children are not ready to be in larger environments.
Right, but they're
So,
telling parents that they need to put them
and
in
these,
these
yeah,
other more
it's not
formal settings. They're
it's
making
not real
financial
preschool.
choices. Yep.
It's, yeah, if it's not in a school
Right.
setting, and then you have a child that's having emotional issues, or they're having separation anxiety, and it's much worse than it probably would have been in a smaller environment,
Right.
or the assumption that just because there's more children makes it more professional and everything. And look, if you probably talk to that teacher, they would be like, no, 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 more children does not. No, but now that this conversation does go into now our conversation about this episode, which was about World War II and licensing. When you're talking about the fact that licensing actually for family childcare didn't go up until basically the 70s and 80s. I know for California it was the 80s. And everything before that, during World War II, it was really about licensing orphanages and making sure, but that was, even that didn't have a large like impact, because it was more about health and safety, and that was it.
Right. There are a lot of religious organizations that kind of took up that torch of we need safe spaces for these children. And again, not they didn't have that ratio aspect that we do today. It was much more a health and safety option.
Yeah, and that their health and safety didn't include ratios. And now our health and safety absolutely does include ratios. But and I we know from experience that sometimes they don't actually listen about the ratio issues. I know here in California we've been working trying to adjust, because they still have a 2-year old uh up until they're 2 marked as a infant, despite the fact that all other literature calls a child about 18 months and up is a
A toddler,
toddler
which, as
and
we
stuff.
learned, were called runabouts in
Yes,
the California information, which we thought was absolutely hilarious. Um, but yeah,
because they were running about.
they were. It said infants, runabouts, and school age children. So that was absolutely hilarious when we first saw that.
And everything, I think that when you're talking about licensing and everything, we have to ask, do you believe that the rise of licensing during this time was a direct response to the fact that white women did need access to care, and that that's when they decided that they should do something? And I don't think they still had them for those childcare centers.
Well, when we look at who needs care over time and the sections of population of women specifically that work, because in general it is women who take care of the children for a variety of reasons that we've seen over history. Um, it really also comes down to cultural structure and those villages or those families that may or may not be there and have the option of taking care of children. Typically, in our lighter skinned communities, they don't have that same support structure for a variety of socioeconomical, ethnic reasons, versus those that do, or maybe before that didn't need that outsource per se of childcare because there was a grandparent there. And so, with the rise of more lighter skinned women working, it created a larger need to have more childcare spaces. My concern is, when we look at the World War II and that the government sponsored a lot of this care, and Rosie the Riveter, which, by the way, if you ever have a chance to get up here, go to the Rosie Riveter Museum in Richmond. It is amazing. There's even a little featurette on childcare and women during World War II and after. But when those women then start working, and when you have the state and the government that is sponsoring this care, they then feel that their care is the best. And so, over this whole licensing process, it's very clear that when the government creates this and gives funding, they want those parents to use that funding in a government setting. And they're still then ignoring this in home aspect and all of the benefits that in home brings to it.
This is true. I also feel like, though, that a lot of that did come from a lot of systematic barriers within our system, because of the, again, what was said in Split Roots, the way that child labor was distributed in this country. it made it really, the only way that it was seen as professional was when they took it away from black and brown women as them providing the care and the nannying and all that as a primary source for people, because I think a lot of the stuff, I know when I was in school they taught us about Jim Crow, and we learned about a lot of the laws, and one of the laws that people don't know about is the fact that black women in certain areas could go to jail for not working. We were told we had to work. So our structures, which came up with the National Black Women's Clubs in order to provide childcare for people in our communities, those sprouted up because of that, those situations, but they weren't funded by the government, and everything. Us needing childcare wasn't a priority, but all of a sudden, because they didn't even want to provide it, they wanted mothers to stay home and work, but there was only a certain segment that they actually cared about when it came to them staying home. And we're going to be real, there are movies and anecdotes and everything. There was a lot of white women that wanted to go to work.
Yeah.
And that's, yeah, there's a lot of white, they did not, there's a lot of them, they did not want to stay home, and everything. So this
No.
is where you, this is,
As you and I know, we enjoy the time with the children and the teaching that we do. And we also enjoy our time being adults, what we're doing right
and yeah,
now in the advocacy work. I myself have never, as a child, I never went to a daycare. Both my parents, they own two different businesses. And so for me, daycare was going to the office with my parents and amusing myself coloring. And then I had another sibling come along. And so then, we would play games. We would make up these stupid things and we would make these concoctions of like mustard and ketchup and some other condiment and like dare the other one to drink it, and then there was another one who came along. Like we had some fantastic games, right? But my parents were busy. They were working. They were business persons. And so we grew up entertaining ourselves while parents worked at a desk or they worked out in the plant or something like that. But it was us. We didn't spend time with other persons like that.
and that leads you to believe that legislators then and legislators now, I think, are disconnected from what real people need. Because during this time, you did have a male caucus that was refusing, that didn't at first want women to go to work, and they were refusing. And I told you about the just heinous quote that, about the fact that the worst mother is better than the best childcare center, and you're sitting there and you're like, how does that work? How do you rectify that? And they're assuming that people have the ability to stay home.
Well, and I think there are two different perspectives on that quote, as we've talked about, that from one side, just the total downplaying of anyone caring for a child outside of the home. But on the other side, really, to me, it gives that idea that being cared for by one's own mother, that the worst mother is still better. And so, in one hand, it kind of like props up all mothers, like you are the best care here. But it totally then downplays any other type of care.
See, and that's not what I got from that. For me, I got that, that I got the disregard of the fact that children that no, the worst mother is not better than an adult
Well,
and
and it's,
a
we know
stable
that.
child. Yeah, and I think I could not get past that, because I do know that there's children that have horrifying parental figures and everything, and we know that children who have access to caring adults do better in life, even if they only have access to them
Yeah.
during certain portions of the day and stuff. And
It
so
comes from this utopian idea of what family is and what mothers are and what society is around that family unit in many ways. These people are so disconnected. But as you have, as part of these concepts are also how children do around other children. And as we know, those children being in other environments, in small environments, learning how to interact, the social skills with other children, that if you have a bunch of moms who get together, okay, but do you need every mom in that situation to be there monitoring the children? No, one of those moms could then go work should they choose to work. And so when we're looking at children and what's better for their development, sure, the utopian idea of mom cares for me, it's a utopian idea. In
Yeah.
reality, those children need to be able to be around other children and have some unsupervised time where they create their own games and whatever it happens to be. So there is more than enough space for parents to work, for moms to work.
They just don't want to. They feel like mothers. So, but then the crux of this is that this is where we have black feminism where we wanted the choice to be able to stay home. We didn't
Right.
have that
Everyone wants
choice.
that choice.
Yeah, that we wanted that choice. White feminists wanted the choice to be able to work. And even so now what we're I feel like nowadays it's the struggle is now we may have more women that want to stay home. The struggle is the economy actually set up in a place to do that? I will say that I did find that the pandemic allowed more women who wanted to stay at home but also needed to work. They had that ability. They because their jobs became work from home and stuff. So they literally could take their child to a preschool down the block that probably was a family child care home because again we were open,
Right.
but they were actually able to go get them at a decent time, go pick
Right.
them up at a decent time and take them home. So I guess my question is my question for those legislators that are wanting women to stay home and everything, why would you take away our ability to work from home and say we need to go back to the office and then complain that family structures are broken and that people aren't doing enough, but you've just messed up probably the best the best work home balance that this country has had in like decades. Women and men were able to, I saw a lot of fathers, they were so excited, they were working from home, they could also participate in picking up their children from school.
Right.
Why is this not the economy doesn't allow for us to stay home anymore? And I would argue that World War II showed what this could have looked like. We may have had to fight for family child care inclusion because not everybody wanted, because I mean a lot of
We're fighting
the
today for family child
yes,
inclusion in funding,
and
all of that.
yes. And then, well, did you see how big those child care centers for the World War II children were? There was a lot of them that were holding like 500 plus children in their centers.
They were very large, and that was also part of where you have Eleanor Roosevelt, that many of those that were done, part of that came out of Kaiser in Oregon,
Yes,
for example, that they made meals for the children, but they also had meals for the women to take home, for the mothers to pick up their
mothers.
children
Yes,
and pick up an evening meal also to feed them at home. So there were also other things that came out of those childcare centers for the women during World War II.
and I feel like some of that informed a lot of the practices that we have today about whole families and making sure that the whole family is involved and we know and we're including the whole family and stuff like that. So this is one of those things where where we do have to hold that the harm and the progress of this area, um there were some benefits and then there were some harms to it. The
Absolutely.
segregation, the lack of access for children of color. We also had internment camps during that time. So a lot of the pictures and the recordings from that time period, there were segregation of the children. And it wasn't about equal access or equal and ooh, my brain just cut off. It wasn't about equal access where they were able to have they were had access to the same amount of money. They had access to the same resources. They were just saying, "Oh, you have access. Here, we opened this building." And they sometimes they had to figure it out themselves depending on where they were located. And everything. So it wasn't always the best, but I feel like we can, if we can understand that there was harm, it doesn't take away from the progress, and we can use that to help us create a better foundation for our ECE system now.
Right. Part of what knowing what was wrong also helped you then identify what was right. You can't have the morning without the night, the day without midnight. And so having both helps you, number one, put context to them, but also understand what may or may not actually be so bad or actually was so great. On the other hand, one helps you really appreciate the other of where you came from in order to be where we are now, what gains have been made, but it also gives you a perspective of what still needs to be done in that area. And so when we're talking about, the government sponsoring this care and understanding that it's needed, at the same time, what is it really sponsoring? Is it including family childcare, or is it only saying, like some issues that we're having today with UPK and mixed delivery, who's really able to be involved in
And
where
that,
funding goes?
and I
Because it's
think
also,
that's what
like
they're
you're talking about,
doing.
a mental health issue of that work life balance, that in order to be that best possible parent to our kids, we also need to be able to have that adult time away from them. So there is value in simply having childcare to be able to refresh yourself, have the mental break from them. Because as you and I both know, when you don't get
Yeah.
that mental break and your eye starts to twitch and
Yeah.
it's
Oh, yeah.
Friday right before the holiday, and there's one kid that's still there and it's 5, 4, 3 past time
Yeah. Like,
for them to be picked up. So there isn't also a value in that. And I think when, Nixon, we also have to understand prevailing thoughts at any given time in history towards various feelings. And so entering the Cold War afterwards, and you're looking at why Nixon made the choice that he did, I'm not saying I'm for or against his choice, but his rationale of, you have communist China and Soviet Union and how they were incorporating the care of children and sponsoring it, and that being one of the reasons as to why not using that sort of communist thought, if you will. You also help to understand the perspectives of why some choices were made, given the historical time period in which they were made.
see, and um, I think that I think that we can look at it that way. I think it also shows when you start looking at it critically, and through through these lenses, especially when you have different viewpoints of it and everything. It taking extreme thoughts and then using them to inform practices and everything. This was, I feel like that, in my opinion, that was an extreme thought that helped inform an opinion that could have changed the lives of so many people. But I also feel like we weren't that far out of World War II. There is a chance that a lot of childcare could have been institutionalized in a way
Yes,
that we may not have been completely happy with,
exactly.
and everything.
Had
So,
that
like,
been gone through, I agree. It would have been
and
institutional. And that was his point in what he said.
stuff. I feel like we do not. We do need a national child care system, but at the same time, the people that would be involved in creating a system that would involve us getting paid what we're worth, it would
We're not
not.
invited to the table.
Yeah, and it would not benefit all of the ECE field. And by the way, ECE is zero through third grade. So when we're talking about, we're running the gambit, and some family child care homes take care of children up until 12 years old. So we're talking about a really large chunk of childhood that we're responsible for, and yet we're not included in the conversations around what is best practice. And I think that is the biggest takeaway when you're looking at the licensing, the how feminism was addressed, because of what you've got men during this time making all of these decisions for women, and you're sitting there and you're going, you don't know my life. I love that
Right.
movie. I just can't remember the name of the movie right now. But but it's, they don't, you have these, again, this is a representation problem. You had men at the table during World War II making all these decisions about childcare and women, and if women really needed access, and if they really needed to work outside the home, and they don't understand our lives. And now you've got
They
people
also
in
don't
all,
understand children, though. They're making
no, and
decisions about children, and they don't
children don't
understand the
understand. And
development
now
behind
we
what the
have
children
a
need.
and now it's coming back full circle. We've got people that are making decisions about children, and how women are supposed to show up in the lives of their children, in an economy that doesn't allow parents to stay home. And because it's one of those situations where you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. So
Right. They
you
don't have
if
authentic choice for a variety of
you,
reasons.
and if you decide to stay home with your child, and then but you're on some type of assistance, oh, you're lazy and you're not working. Okay, but I can't afford childcare if I don't. I can't afford childcare unless I work. But you want me to stay home. You can't have it both ways. You can't have an economy that has people fully working in it and participating in it, and who are able to afford the things that they need to take care of themselves without assistance, if you don't provide the structure for them to do so. So that's, but I think this was a wonderful conversation. This is, we had shallow soil and deep problems, and a lot of it was only covered surface level. I want to thank you, Rebecca, for digging in with us. Yes, the pun was intended.
I brought my shovel.
Today proved that childcare history is messy, layered, and absolutely impacted by who was deemed worthy of support. Spoiler, it wasn't all of us. Not one person that was at the table, or that wasn't at the table, benefited from that system in the way that they needed to. But we're not afraid to get our hands dirty. We'll be back next time. Same roots, deeper questions. See you there. Thank you.